Welcome to another Facebook Live session at Bailiwick Legal. Before we kick off today, I'd like to congratulate Matilda, who was admitted last Friday and is now a fully fledged solicitor and barrister of the courts of WA. Well done.
Thanks, Bill.
Melissa. Matilda. Sorry. Okay, so now that you are full-blown lawyer, can you tell us what today's topic is?
Yeah, of course. So today we're going to talk about harvest pay rates. We thought it was an ideal time, seeing as some people have already started harvest or are about to. So we're going to delve into some of the things you should consider when engaging staff for this busy period of the year. So we're going to look at whether you should be employing staff as employees on a casual basis, or whether you should be looking at contracting. We'll also talk a little bit about the different awards that exist, and go into a bit of detail about entitlements.
Right. And one of the first issues, I think, which is an issue that we have queries on quite often, is this tension between whether a person is an employee or whether they're a contractor. How do you tell?
Absolutely. It's something we definitely come across quite regularly. Now, there are distinct differences between an employee and a contractor. For one, employees are generally employed with the expectation that they're going to receive regular systematic work. There could be an agreement in place. They're also employed, with set hours, set pay, whereas contractors have a lot more flexibility and freedom. So a contractor is generally only engaged for a certain period of time to do a certain task. They have their own responsibilities when it comes to superannuation and tax, and they generally invoice as opposed to employees that are paid by the employee on a regular basis.
Right. And there's been a couple of High Court decisions within the last couple of months dealing with this particular issue. Have they been of any help to deal with this tension?
Absolutely. So there's one case that comes to mind, so that's ZG Operators. It involved two truck drivers that had been employed with a company for about 30 years. They'd been employees for the majority of that time, and then sort of towards the end of their employment changed, and they entered an agreement that looked a lot like a contractor's agreement. So essentially they were asked to purchase their own trucks, and then they would deliver the goods of the company using their own trucks. Now, the two truck drivers alleged that they were still employees of the company. They were entitled to the same entitlements as an employee. But the court looked at it and said, well, actually the agreement states that, this is it appears to be a contract agreement. So the two truck drivers were actually found to be contractors, despite from the similarities they had of actually being employees.
So in essence, they were very much like employees that the company already had, but were driving company trucks, but they had their own trucks and ostensibly carrying on a business in their own right.
Exactly. So it came down to that freedom, like I said before, that the contractors had. So there was that distinction.
Yeah. Okay, and so, all right, well, let's look at harvest. We really should be at that point in time, but harvest is probably a bit late this year. But if farmers are going to contract for casual labour, what are some of the things they need to be conscious of?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, an agreement is something that we would recommend if it's an employee or a contractor. In writing. Yeah. Of course, there can be verbal agreements, but in writing is always the better way to go. It's what we always advise.
Yeah.
Now, in that agreement, it's explicitly setting out the role of the contractor, what they're required to do.
Well, let's call them workers.
Workers, that's
right?
a better term, yeah.
Or labour, all right? And in the sense that a labour can be either an employee or a contractor. And with each, there are different rights and obligations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So workers, if they're employed in a contractual sense.
Yep.
So yeah, like I said, certain period of time, certain task. When it comes down to their delegation of work, contractors essentially again have that freedom, whereas an employee, your employer will set the tasks, the things that you're required to do on a day-to-day basis. as well as control. So, I mean, a lot of contractors will bring their own equipment, like the trucks.
Yeah.
Employees will generally use their employer's equipment.
Yeah. So, in a harvest context, and I think you could probably deal with this also looking at seeding. We have what's known in the industry as contract harvesters and contract seeders. Those people that have their own machines and come in and do the work for the farmer. Is that one way to distinguish this contract versus employee issue?
It is, but again, it all comes down to looking at the relationship. Those things I mentioned earlier, like the role, who's paying who, superannuation, all these other arrangements, they're the things you have to look at. Yeah, if there's an agreement, you go by the agreement and what are the terms of that agreement. All these other things about how long you're employed for, the superannuation you pay, that helps to determine whether it's an employer or a contractor. Yeah. So you kind of have to dig a little deeper and ask yourself these questions to determine whether they're an employee or a contractor. Yeah,
it is a bit of a conundrum, and I think the takeout I got from the recent High Court decisions is that the parties are certainly able to put into a written document their rights and obligations and entitlements, and the court doesn't necessarily concern itself with those issues, but the court does concern itself with how the relationship is characterised.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I suppose when it comes to those entitlements, that's when we refer to awards.
Yeah.
So we look at, they're obviously determine if an award applies.
Yeah.
That's what determines them. So in particular, in the agricultural industry coming up to harvest, there are 2 applicable awards, but they depend on how you're farming your business. If you run the farm through a company, an incorporated business, then the federal system will apply and the pastoral award will apply.
Yeah.
But if you're running your business as a partnership or a trust or even a sole trader, then it's under the state system, which is different.
Yeah. And there's an important distinction there too, because when people talk about companies, they typically think just of a company. But obviously farm businesses are run through trusts, and there could be a corporate trustee.
Yes.
So that also flips them into the fair work environment. And similarly, where you have a partnership and one of the partners is a corporate entity, again, that pushes them into the federal system. Somewhat bizarrely, we still do have a state industrial relations system, and that's there's been no plans to change that either with this current government we have in WA. But yeah, sorry, Matilda, coming back to you and the award entitlements.
Yes. Well, so under the pastoral award, the most common one, that determines the rate of pay, the minimum wage, if there's any deductions. It determines if you're a casual employee, how many hours you're required to work, same with full-time. It also sets out your leave entitlements, so whether that's sick leave, stress leave. So it's a very lengthy document, but it sets out all those entitlements that need to be in a contract, in a written agreement, if you're going to employ staff at harvest.
Yeah. And is there a choice of employment in the sense that you can put people on a full-time basis, a part-time basis, a casual basis, even though the tenure of work might only be for, say, 2 months?
Well, that's something you've got to look at the award for.
Yeah.
So you've got to determine, okay, how long are they working for? Have you got a set period of time? If they're casual and you're not sure how long harvest is going to go for, which is pretty common, then obviously you're better off going casual. Obviously you can have fixed term contracts as well. But yeah, it again depends looking at the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. And so if they're not in the system under the pastoral award,
yes,
they fall within the state system. And what award actually applies there?
So that's the WA Farm Employees Award. Bit different to the pastoral award. It's a nice short document, and that sets out the casual rates. It is. It is good. But again, it's still succinct. So you've got your leave entitlements. Again, you've got how many hours, whether you're entitled to, I suppose, any other benefits. So at harvest, obviously, you can incorporate accommodation or food or use of a vehicle as well. And so that's also covered in the state award.
Yeah. I do like the state award because it only really has one classification.
Yes.
Farmhand.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's great from that point of view, and it's quite a flexible award in the sense that
Yes.
you can work any day of the week, Monday through to Sunday. There's no overtime provisions.
Yes.
You know, whereas in the pastoral award, you've got a few more rigours, such as overtime and penalty rates. Yeah, so quite interesting. So, as a takeout for farmers looking to engage harvest labour, what are we saying?
Well, as I said before, a written agreement is one of the most important things you should consider when you're employing staff or engaging a contractor during harvest.
Yep.
But on that, it's about looking at your business. If you're a company, if you're a partnership, a sole trader, they all impact on which award and the entitlements you should be paying your employee.
Yep.
So that would be my two key takeaways.
Right. Thanks, Matilda.
No, thank you, Phil.
Right, thank you, everyone. And I think we're done for today. We'll be back maybe next month, but possibly next year. We'll just have to wait and see. But we'll certainly let you know. And finally, if you need assistance with casual harvest labour, writing up contracts of employment, they're things we do as part and parcel of our work for farmers. So good luck all, and see you soon.
See ya.